I am Tia, and I am here with my other group members, Jennifer and Maddalena. We are doing a presentation on our group paper for media and culture. And so our overview for our topics include conflict theory, religion practices in the digital age, and media surveillance. So conflict theory. What is conflict theory? So conflict theory is essentially describing the tension and turmoil that arises from unequal distribution of resources and things of that such between two different groups. These two different groups usually have differing identities within like socioeconomic status, races and ethnicities, age, gender. It's an exhaustive list, but that's just a few of them. So how conflict theory is perpetuated within modern society is, and specifically in media as well, is it's within our newspapers, news channel broadcasts, and even things through like movies, like childhood movies. So as for real life examples of conflict theory, our text for this class included an example of conflict theory within the education system. And how conflict theory is in an education system is that there is much inequality and unequal distribution of resources to the students. So students that are in areas of lower socioeconomic status usually go to the schools within that same area. And because in those areas, they usually receive less funding for infrastructure and educational systems, it makes sense that they don't have access to nearly as many resources as students of higher affluent areas. So that's how it is in education systems. As for within news media, we can see cases of stealing, particularly stealing of products such as like luxury bags, luxury products, or even commodities that are found in department stores. So how conflict theory perpetuates that is that these individuals usually do not have the money or do not have the means to obtain these products in ways that are deemed acceptable by society, which entails exchanging money for the product. So because they don't have the means, they usually have to take it upon themselves to go steal the item, whether they want to or not. Unfortunately, in many of these cases, the products that they steal is sometimes needed for their health and well-being, or sometimes even needed to sell off to gain finances. So yes, within media, such as movies, I have two examples. First example is Disney Aladdin. And what this story within the movie follows a young man named Aladdin who is very poor. And he falls in love and is interested with the princess and is interested in pursuing a relationship with her. Her name is Jasmine. And throughout this movie, the theme is posed to have non-affluence versus affluence. And we see that because Aladdin meets a genie in which grants him wishes. And he uses those wishes to try to pose himself as this ideal man in which he thinks Jasmine would want. But Aladdin learns that he does not need to change himself necessarily. He learns to love himself and accept the way he is. And only then will he accept the love and be able to give the love that he believes Jasmine deserves. So in this particular scene that I have chosen in my clip, it is a scene from the beginning of the movie in which him and Abu, his monkey companion, steal a loaf of bread from the vendors. And not only are they chased by vendors, but they're also chased by the local police. But he is successful in his getaway and is seen here high-fiving Abu. And this can not only show, like I said before, the non-affluence versus affluence, because he feels the need to steal this bread because he doesn't have the means to obtain this bread as giving money and obtaining the bread. But what I want to get at here is that people who steal, even though stealing is posed as this crime within our society, it is not always done with malice intent. Like I mentioned before, some people need to steal these resources in order to maintain their health and well-being. As for Aladdin's case, he needs it to satiate his hunger. And to build off of the non-malice intent, Aladdin sees two little children who are likely to be siblings, one girl and one younger boy, rummaging through the garbage to find food to satiate their own hunger. And they do not necessarily have the skills nor experience that Aladdin has, as Aladdin is much older and much younger. And Aladdin sees them and is very saddened by the image. So he eventually comes to the decision to give the children the bread, despite what he had to go through to obtain the bread. And so my next example is Pixar, Ratatouille. So Ratatouille builds off the same theme of non-affluence versus affluence, but not necessarily in terms of monetary needs, more so in terms of resources and quality of life. So within the movie Ratatouille, we follow a rat named Remy who is really displeased with how his life is turning out. So his life as a rat is very stressful. He's constantly having to find food, rummaging through trash. A lot of the food that he finds happens to be spoiled and unfortunately doused with rat poison. And in addition to those struggles, he also has to deal with the stress of constantly being rejected by human society. In a human's eyes, he is just viewed as this disgusting creature who is always stealing things and is very cunning. It's not a good opinion of rats from a human perspective. And this inhibits him from gaining what he really wants, which is to experience and being able to relish in high quality food. So he is not able to get any of that. He has to go through many obstacles to obtain those foods, such as hijacking a woman's house. I think he's jumping out of a window with a cookbook. He really much adores food, but he can't readily get it because of how society has posed him against the counterpart in which have the high quality food that he wants.
All right, thanks, Tia. That was great. My section is about the intersection between religion, their practices, and digital media. And I'm going to talk a little bit about memes and then the practice of streaming services live for a lot of different types of houses of worship. Just to give a little background, there's a long-standing tradition and examples of congregations, organizations, preachers putting their material out publicly over the radio first and then television and then now digital media. Through that course of time, and especially with the beginning of the 1950s, 1960s of a televangelist called Jimmy Swaggart, we could see an increasing move from just presenting a sermon like you would see in church to a high entertainment factor. It was really structured to be very engaging with elements of music and the message and then talking points to the congregation. And as we've moved into the digital era, this trend has just increased. Social media really lends itself to that format well. You can find digital religious content across all platforms: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. They use hashtags, and it's not just just a couple of religions. Many religions worldwide are present on digital media. There are a lot of wins for them using digital media. It's scalable. It can be done from the congregation to reaching congregations around the world just with a couple clicks of a keyboard. It allows for a lot of innovation. It allows for them to have an entree into hard to reach populations, shut-ins, the elderly who maybe can't physically make it into church, traveling workers who don't follow the same rhythms as the congregations that they participate in. And as we've seen very recently with the pandemic, it's a very, very useful tool for maintaining continuity during disruptions, like when we had lockdowns, or when congregations are maybe changing locations and facilities. It's a great way to have continuity there. I know my own daughter experienced that in participating in her youth group online during the pandemic. There are some downsides, though, to the participation in digital media. Just like with anything else, successes and failures live forever on the internet. So we can certainly see that in religious organizations. And then critics and detractors of different faiths can certainly take video clips, sound bites, pictures, and they can take them out of context and weaponize them. We can see that move into levels of harassment against different faiths, different faith leaders, congregations, what have you. And then we can also see where different organizations that may be having internal disputes, that gets played out publicly, sometimes on social media, is currently happening at a large church in the Jacksonville area, whereas prior to digital media, that actually would have been much more private and offline. So yeah, that's something that they have to contend with. So the first example we're going to look at is how religious memes are used in the digital world. And I pulled up a TEDx talk by Dr. Heidi Campbell. She's a professor at Texas A&M. She's a professor of communications and of religious studies. And she really focuses in on the intersection of technology, digital media, and religion and religious culture. She's talked about in her presentation how at the outset, when we first see a meme, it's either going to strike us as humorous or something that's really pithy and wise. But a lot of times there is a lot of subtext happening on those memes. There is sarcasm and even insider coded language that can serve as cues to extremist thinking that the general population may not be aware of. In her, she's the director over the network of New Media, Religion, and Digital Culture Studies, where they archive, track, and are trying to collect a large database of memes across multiple religions around the world. And what they're seeing is a trend where these negative memes are becoming more and more overt and attacking in their themes. And so that becomes something later on we'll talk about that's important to track. Just a little background, memes, as far as religion goes, first appeared about 2 decades ago online in forums and chat rooms. And they were used to really draw attention to weighty issues that were being discussed in the day. But then it didn't take long for them to be put out there and to be used in negative ways. And they've really become an echo chamber of tropes and negative stereotypes and things like that, as we're going to see in the next few examples. Okay, so the top left one is an anti-Semitic themed one, and it's a play. That image is actually called The Happy Merchant, and it's a play on Shakespeare's play The Merchant of Venice, where there's a merchant in there, and one of the main themes that they contend with in the play is the idea of self-interest over love. It's also a play, the imagery, you can see that it used very exaggerated facial features, which is a long standing, for centuries and centuries, in characterizations of Jewish people, particularly in this case, talking about the Goyim nose, which is a play on the homonyms, the word nose, and the word knows as in to know something. Talking about the idea that there's this worldwide underground network of Jewish financiers who are working to manipulate worldwide markets and things like that, which is a long-standing held stereotype. It originally appeared in a white supremacist paper tracts that were being circulated around the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, it migrated online. And the bottom message of it is that Jews are greedy. And some of the language originally around it is that they are vermin that need to be dealt with. So that's a really negative thing happening there. On the top right, that is a meme along kind of an, on the surface it doesn't seem like an anti-Muslim thing. It seems like they're trying to just play off of anti-Muslim things, saying I am the bomb at making falafels. But what ends up happening here is it takes the stereotype that Islam is a religion of violence, and instead of really pushing back against it, it actually puts it out there again. Like we talk about in that echo chamber kind of a way. Rather than just having a meme about this guy's great at making falafels, they intersect that idea of bombing and violence with the picture and make it very visual. And then the one in the bottom center is one that has anti-Christianity type messages. It's Jesus supposedly talking to the disciples about origins of creation, and apparently they ask him, explain to us about Genesis 1. And he says, look, when NASA arrives, they'll explain creation to you better than I can, which are hashtags, things Jesus never said. And it sounds funny, but it has the effect of taking and flattening adherents of the Christian faith into having just one type of viewpoint on creation or origins and science and the intersections of all those, when the reality is they're very, very diverse across Christianity. And then it really puts the idea out there that Christianity can be unsophisticated or nuanced. So you can just see in these three examples a little bit of how stereotypes, it's very easy to perpetuate them in a very quick way, in a way that just goes around the world really quickly. And then the next thing we're going to look about, swinging more to the positive side of digital media, is how houses of worship, and not just Christian houses of worship, though that's the example we're showing here, but how they leverage digital media to get their content out to their adherents and out in the world in general. So we're going to look at an example from Celebration Church, which is a mega church in the Jacksonville, Florida area. They have about 7,500 attendees regularly each week. They have campuses in Florida, Europe, and Africa. So for them, churches like that, it's really important if they're going to put out a central message across all of those locations. Digital media makes it really, really easy. Each week, they have kind of a thing that's stylized like a pre-service show. It follows the same format. It follows about the same time slot each week, about 12 minutes. And it starts with these static images. First, they kind of rotate through different slides, welcoming people, kind of doing a countdown to how long until the service begins, calls to action, following them on social media, like you can see there, where you can find their church website, how to hashtag, portals for giving, all of those kinds of things. And then it transitions to the hosted portion of that pre-service show. And Tia, you were doing a great job. Thank you. You can see here where we've got two hosts, and this is always the case, so the hosts rotate. They're there as viewers start to sign in. What we can't see here, there's a sidebar with a chat room, and they're calling out different people. That chat room is hosted by some people that we see offline, but they'll call them out. We have so-and-so from Africa joining in or whatever. Again, they're reiterating some of those messages that we see on the static slides, but they're also talking about upcoming events. They're talking about what the service is going to be. You hear high energy music in the back. You'll see people milling around. It's also very careful in the variety of hosts that they choose to show the diversity in the church in terms of gender, age, race. There's usually a staff member and maybe a high-level leader that are put up there. You can see in the background some of the components of what happens in the church. So it's a very quick way for a church or a congregation, any kind of house of worship, to communicate a lot of intangibles that people are absorbing and not even realizing that they're seeing and taking in. And it really puts a culture of a house of worship out there. And yeah, sorry, we had a little bit of a digital interruption there in the internet, which can occur. But we were just saying is that, yeah, this is really a great way for congregations to leverage their opportunities on the internet and reach into populations in ways that never would have been dreamed of 50 years ago. So that kind of wraps up my part. Maddalena, I'll toss it to you.
Yes, media surveillance is the portion of the paper that I delved into. Media surveillance is the collection of data and information, usually on a massive scale, and the information can be collected via social media or through even, of course, various information that is collected in our commercial transactions, but also in some cases, this information can be communication that we carry out, whether through phone calls or through calls that we make through different applications on our phones these days. This is done on such a massive scale. Usually it's done by government agencies, but it can also be done by large corporations. Obviously, usually they are the ones that have the means, whether it's financial means or even just for the access to these kinds of applications that allow the collection of such metadata that is collected from everyone. Surveillance is also done, though, on a more of a personal level, and that's something that is less talked about when it comes to social media surveillance. And this is done more by individuals that monitor other individuals on social media by looking at their preferences, their likes, dislikes, based on what they post on social media. And it's done, of course, for friends and family, but also for maybe acquaintances or work colleagues. So sometimes this is something that is done more broadly, as we will delve into it a little bit deeper. For what regards the first video that we saw, it titled "Living in a Surveillance State," this was presented by Mikko Hipponen, who is a Finnish computer security expert and a speaker and author on these subjects. This particular TED Talk in Brussels was done right after Edward Snowden's leak of information about the collection of data by the NSA on pretty much everyone in the world. And so obviously it brought up a lot of questions, and in particular, even though, of course, we knew, or rather security experts knew that such surveillance was being done, or that collection of data was being done, I guess this leak brought to the forefront the extent to which this collection of this data was being done. And that surprised most, even people like him who were, lived and breathed this kind of subject on a daily basis. In particular, the collection of data is done mostly, or at least was done by the NSA, because the United States has most of the technological companies that have data either collected at or passing through somehow. So when it comes to the collection of such data, government agencies or intelligence agencies in the United States have a great advantage compared to, for example, other countries. And this, of course, leaves a lot of people who are from other countries, countries other than the United States, which is 96% of the world, makes them very weary. Mm-hmm. and obviously, Mr. Hipponen being one of them, he was very, obviously upset about that. The collection of this data by the NSA was done under the guise of protecting people from terrorism in particular, but criminal entities in general. However, this was, Mr. Hipponen rightfully says that obviously this was not the real reason, since they surveilled everyone indiscriminately, people that had no suspicions on them, or even government, heads of government, of foreign governments. So it was done, like I said, indiscriminately and on a very broad basis. The idea that a lot of people are comfortable with is the fact that maybe this collection of data is done to protect us, as we said, from potential bad actors in the world. But and so saying that they have nothing to hide, they think that this cannot, it just won't affect them in any way. But that's the case because obviously there is the whole issue of losing the right to privacy. Most maybe don't have anything criminal, hopefully, to hide, but we may have things that are embarrassing or just things that we don't wish to share with everyone or with an intelligence agency, even less if this intelligence agency is not even our own country's intelligence agency. Right. If were the case, for example, for, like I said, people that live outside the United States. The right to privacy is also very important when it comes to political figures. The president of Brazil at the time, who was a victim of this NSA surveillance, was saying that, and I quote, if there is no right to privacy, there can be no true freedom of expression and opinion, and therefore no effective democracy. And that is, in fact, a very important point to be made. As we mentioned earlier, another type of social surveillance that we do is the one that we do through social media, as is presented in the other TED Talk by David Lyon, who is a sociologist who worked at Queen's University in Ontario. And he starts presenting in this video, which is really interesting if anyone would like to watch it when you look at the links in our references slide, shows how much information we share by sharing a video by a Belgian bank who sets up a fake mind reading booth in Brussels and invites people in to have their mind read. And this person reveals very, very personal, accurate, and of the most disparate kinds of information on the people who are volunteering, and only to reveal at the end of the interviews that all of this information was actually collected from their own social media by computer experts that were hiding behind a curtain. And of course, the people are very surprised and shocked. This shows just the level of the amount of information that can be gathered just by looking us up online these days. It's social media is a world that we really cannot escape in our day and age, or new media in general, whether we use it for personal use or professional use, or even just by shopping online, or even just joining loyalty programs with the stores that we shop at more regularly. We just or our credit cards that share information on what we purchase, where we purchase it. We really are not. None of us is really immune to this level and kind of surveillance, or at least information sharing that we do even voluntarily. But perhaps the most striking one is the one that I said, like you said, like David Lyon says, we do ourselves on other people that we know, and that would make, in a study in 2012, to over a third of the participants said that they do some level of surveillance of people that they know, and about 50% of them admitted that the people that they surveilled would be uncomfortable at best, or embarrassed by being surveilled by them. So obviously it's something that gives us pause, and this level of surveillance can have positive outcomes, of course, in our lives. For example, when we have GoFundMe, it can lead to GoFundMe campaigns to help people that maybe are going through some difficulties in their lives, but it can also result in cyberbullying when things that people share online can be used against them or to bully them, of course. Fundamentally, the right to privacy is what we need to preserve, but also David Lyon suggests that this level of surveillance shows that we have become a surveillance society. This surveillance has become pervasive to the point that we all do it, that we all kind of form our opinions and profiles of the people that we know, even on a personal level, not only when it comes to corporations or government entities. Ultimately, we should be more careful of who we trust and how much we trust them with, and particularly be careful of the benefits that we gain from sharing so much information about ourselves, even when we shop, and weigh the pros and cons, decide whether that discount is worth the amount of information that we are sharing with the company that offers it by just maybe giving our phone number or our email address. And that's also the end of my presentation.
Okay.
Or actually, rather to add, this obviously shows that companies that collect data on our behalf and then act as defenders of this data with government, and when government entities try to acquire it, in reality are defending their own interests because it is a currency for them. It's valuable, and they don't want to share it for free, obviously. And the other meme shows how we pretty much cannot escape being surveilled or even hacked, because everyone obviously in this day and age has a computer, and even just a Google search can expose us to whatever our interests may be, or what we, and contribute to creating the profile of us. And that concludes.
All right, Maddalena, thank you. Something we wanted to close with is the question of why, on a sociological broad level, is it important to study these things. So, Tia, let's hear from you first about why conflict theory should be studied as far as how it intersects with digital media.
Yes, of course. So I think conflict theory is extremely important to learn about, not only like for a personal reason, but also just to have a broader perspective on our society. So why I say personal is that something that I did not mention when I was first defining conflict theory was that when talking about the students, they are restricted of certain resources and are restricted of the quality of education, right? But unfortunately, what a lot of these schools do is that they feed to the students' minds that they're always going to be stuck within this kind of status, and it turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy in which, because they have this mindset, they're going to follow this this timeline within their life. So unfortunately, it can lead into, like I mentioned before, them stealing such products because they don't feel like they don't have the money for it, or they won't ever get the money for it. So I would just would like students to try to fight that mindset and try to fight what they're being fed, despite it being harder than it actually, it's easier said than done. So that's for a personal reason, but also for a broader perspective on society. I think it's especially important to learn about conflict theory when it comes to racial profiling. So racial profiling happens much more often than we think within our justice system. So unfortunately, what a lot of society tends to believe is that people of color, specifically Black individuals, are known to commit more crimes, or it's just natural for them to commit crimes, which is completely false. Right. It's just how society has portrayed these individuals, unfortunately, and these issues are very deep-rooted within American society of racism, all the isms in that sort. Yeah. And then just having more compassion, empathy, and sympathy for everyone around us, especially people of color, especially Black individuals who are subject to this racial profiling and unfortunately are fed a lot of negative information throughout their lives.
Okay, great, thank you. Maddalena, what about you? What are some of the whys that you encountered on studying media surveillance at a sociological level?
Yes, the why it's well, as obviously, as I said before, surveillance is so pervasive in our day and age, and we really cannot escape anything that is related to technology, to modern media that we use on a daily basis. So the reason why it's important for us to be able to preserve our privacy is there are many reasons actually. One of them is that, for example, any organization that could be promoting social change and try to change the status quo in society may be hindered by the fact that maybe information is collected on its members or on people that participate in them, and that can be used as a way to also hinder democracy and legitimate opposition, by using information that is collected, maybe embarrassing data, or even just simply using any kind of information against them. Surveillance of the Muslim communities in the aftermath of 9/11 sowed discord and also distrust in the institutions such as law enforcement, because they were used to profile them rather than racial profile them, as Tia was mentioned as another example, and rather than protect them. And also the fact that these can be used for our safety, though, is one of the positive aspects of it. Obviously, it is undeniable that some attacks have been thwarted because and thanks to surveillance. So obviously there are some positive aspects. It's a balancing act to see to which point are we willing to give up our privacy for our security, but ultimately privacy should always prevail, obviously. But also these kinds of efforts have to be global efforts because of the nature, simply the nature of the internet, which obviously has no boundaries, and adherence to certain standards by one country would not make any difference when it comes to maybe other countries doing things that are completely different. And the United States has the most power in this because obviously, as we said in the beginning, most of the technological companies that control or have access somehow to these data do reside in the United States. So so that's the reason why it's important.
Okay, thank you. For me, talking about the intersection of digital media and religious practices, they're kind of two sides of the same coin as to why they should be studied sociologically, and it really has to do with tracking trends that we see. On the one hand, while we don't want to do racial profiling like you talked about, Tia, or unequal balances of power, the things that you talked about with surveilling, Maddalena, it is important at some level to track upticks that we see in anti-religious digital meetings against any particular religious group in terms of hate crimes and things like that. But then also in terms of growth in extremism and where that extremism in religion moves into, I'm going to try to say this word correctly, politicization. I don't think I did that right, but of those things. And then they become power struggles and they're used to hurt people. So that's one side of the coin. On the other side, the CDC and many, many mental health organizations have pointed out, that there are numerous protective factors that we can use to move through periods of trauma at an individual level and at a societal level. Talking about even like we just came through as a society, as globally, and in our local communities and our families through the pandemic. One of the protective factors that they point out is involvement in a faith community. And I think for our practitioners of mental health, especially at state and federal government levels, to track how's that going? How are people doing with mental health? Where do we need to support certain agencies? Where do we need to have partnerships and communities with with houses of worship, faith communities, especially after times like we experience here in Florida, our recent storms. A lot of times those communities become centers of resource distribution, food, clothing, things like that after disasters, and tracking, what are the effective ways that they get information out to people. It's amazing how much people are still able to access digital things. I think in the Hurricane Ian that just happened, they had cell towers down there within 24 to 48 hours. They were starting to put those up in an emergency. So it becomes a really important factor in that interplay at a society level between faith, community, and resources, and supporting people mentally. And so for those reasons, I do think it's really important, amongst others, really important to study those things. But ladies, it was a pleasure to work with you. I learned a lot. Thank you to you. Thank you, Maddalena. I hope you guys learned a lot too about these things. And to our professor, we laughed because just as his videos often go well over what he has planned, we were concerned that we might not come up with 5 minutes apiece. And I think we're probably at about the 50 to 1 hour mark now, believe it or not. So ladies, thank you. It's been a privilege. All right, and we're just going to wait to show that slide because I know we were supposed to get our references in there. Yep, there we go. So we are good. No copyright issues there. And all right, well, you guys have a wonderful holiday session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.